Well, thank you.
It is perfectly fine that you went over. This is the first of our hearings that are going to look at this virtual space. And as you all know, Senator Klobuchar and I've done a lot of work in trying to secure the American citizens' privacy in the virtual space. And as we work through this on this committee, I think that foundational to the conversations is who owns an internet user's data and what is the scope of that ownership? Where does it begin? Where does it end? And let's just go down the line. Ms. Goodloe, starting with you, and everybody keep it under a minute and answer that question so that we've got that for the record.
Thank you for the question. Our companies provide business-to-business technologies to other companies. In many cases, their business customers own the data that they store with B2B providers, and yet there may be personal data that individuals own as well. And those individuals should have rights like to access, correct, and delete that information, no matter whether it's stored with a consumer-facing company or the business-to-business provider processing it on behalf of that consumer-facing company.
Okay, Mr. Thayer.
Given the lack of appropriate consent regimes, I would say that the user owns that data, because I don't think that the way we have things set up right now, the data subject doesn't even know that they've given over some of that data. And so at the end of the day, I think the reality is that we have to have privacy regimes in place to ensure that the ownership, to outline those particular contours, but it is 100% you own your data, and it shouldn't be the other way around.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. It's a very good question. There are some nuances here, I think, that are important. First, Main Street businesses, understand it's the user's data, and the user has the right to correct it, delete it, remove it from their system. But there are some kinds of data that is considered shared. And so, for example, if you make a purchase in a store, well, the store needs to keep a record of that purchase if you want to do a return or an exchange for their inventory. So, is it the consumers that this consumer made this purchase on this date? Is that personal information? Yes. Is it also information the business needs and can't just get rid of? Yes. And so I think when it comes down to ownership, we just have to understand that in modern, commerce and e-commerce, some information will need to be retained, but only for as long as it's necessary to retain it. And I think hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Chair Blackburn. We believe that we all have a fundamental right to control when our data is used and how it is collected. But individual mechanisms of consent and control don't provide a complete solution to this problem, and that's why we feel that it is so important to have rules of the road that protect people's privacy by default and align business collection and use data practices with what consumers reasonably expect.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator. I very much agree with Mr. Butler. Data about people should be owned by people, but at the same time, as Alan said, we don't want a world in which people are solely responsible for protecting their own privacy. That's why we need strong federal protections that don't put the onus on people, but put the onus on companies to make sure they're not abusing people's privacy.
Yep. Yep. It was over a decade ago that now Senator Welch and I were in the House at Energy and Commerce Committee. I know Mr. Martino remembers all of this, and we had bipartisan legislation to establish a data privacy framework. And of course, big tech fought it just all the way to today. We still don't have it into law. So, Mr. Thayer, talk for a minute about why big tech has found it so vitally important to kill any effort to have federal online privacy.
Because it's against their financial interest to actually be regulated. I mean, that's the obvious answer. But in reality, what you're pointing out, and I think everyone on this subcommittee has experienced, it doesn't matter how tailored you make the you make your legislation. It doesn't matter how measured. They will find some reason and put something forward. If you want to do antitrust reform, for instance, they'll say there's a privacy violation. If you say there's privacy, then we have to worry about competition. It's always this game of whack-a-mole. And so at the end of the day, they like the way things are because it benefits them. The market is basically created for them. And so I think this is exactly why we have strong advocates fighting for things like the Kids Online Safety Act, where you have parents begging Congress to do something, and we're seeing the harms play out right in front of us. I think at this point, we've recognized that big tech is in the emperor has no pants moment, and we're all starting to see that we absolutely need the reforms. And so things like the Open App Markets Act are going to be very helpful to quell any of those privacy concerns. The Kids Online Safety Act, I think, will do a lot to find measured, targeted approaches that will ultimately help kids. And then but again, I think that the waves are changing, and I think that I'm very hopeful. And things that I'm seeing at the DOJ, especially from the first Trump administration to the Biden administration, out the gate to the new Trump administration, it seems as if everyone has identified that these companies are bad actors and they should not be trusted. So I hope whatever advocacy I can provide would be to outline that this is really just don't fall for the red herrings. Ultimately, the side of right is to protect consumers, and big tech has no interest in doing that.
Ms. Goodloe, I want to come back to you. In your testimony, you talked about state laws and the importance of some of those state laws. I want you to define a couple of the common elements that you have seen in the state laws that could be transferred into a federal law that should be broadly supported and accepted.
Thank you for the question. I think the states provide a lot of common ground for Congress to look to as it works toward federal privacy legislation. That common ground exists on things like the consumer rights that we've talked about today, rights to access, correct, delete, and port your data to another service, rights to opt out of the sale of your data, targeted advertising, certain types of profiling. And states are unanimous on recognizing there are different types of companies that handle consumers' data. One set of obligations should be assigned to controllers who decide how and why to collect a consumer's data, how to use it. And one set of obligations should be put on the processors that handle the data on behalf of controllers. I also want to take a moment to respond to something that Mr. Martino brought up about what those processors do when they employ other sub-processors, because in many cases what processors do is they collect a series of other sub-processors, package it together, and are able to provide it to business customers at scale so that their small businesses can enjoy the economies of scale of being able to use cutting-edge technologies. Mm-hmm. That means you're providing the same service to hundreds or thousands of business customers, and letting one object to a package of sub-processors doesn't work. That's why we haven't seen the majority of states adopt that, which could actually increase security risk to consumers when one of those sub-processors has a breach and they have to go and ask permission to change over the data. But I think we do see broad agreement among the states about the right set of consumer rights and obligations on businesses to safeguard consumers' data and to do so effectively, along with a common enforcement system that is a regulatory-led enforcement system to ensure we have consistent expectations for companies that want to comply with privacy and security obligations.
Mr. Martino, you wanted to respond?
Yes, just on the sub-processor point, and one thing to keep in mind with the ADPPA, that was the predecessor to the APRA, the way the definitions worked, a sub-processor was also defined as a processor. So once it got to a processor, there could be this endless train of data sharing that the Main Street business has no control over. Well, that might be great for efficiencies of the services that the main processor is providing. There's no check on the downstream, and so that's why all that we've been pushing for was a simple notice to the Main Street business of the sub-processor you are using and the right to object. It's not like an opt-in that, that they can't go to them and they can't provide these efficiencies. So that's just it's an in-the-weeds point, but I think it's an important point because it's the Main Street businesses that will be held liable under most of these constructs because the same requirements aren't applying to the processors and the same enforcement mechanisms aren't applying. I'll make one last point. In the APRA, the private right of action largely applied only to what are called the controllers, but of course these Main Street businesses that can't really control the big tech companies, and it hardly applied to the processors, and it didn't apply at all to the third parties. So I think we have to look at not just that these state laws have requirements, but who's subject to them and who's liable for those violations.
Okay. You had additional questions? Go ahead.
It's really an extraordinary panel.